I walk into her apartment and she's sleeping in bed with some Israeli soldier, right? And
That's crushing.
yeah, I mean, I was a kid and I was shocked. And I felt all the things you could imagine, heartbreak and disbelief and betrayal, and how could I be so stupid and all of that. By the way, it was a torturous ending because then we were together again, then apart, and until the last shred of my dignity was destroyed.
Oof.
And what I realized was that I could not control everything. And the humility that comes from that is extraordinarily important and instructive. And frankly, deeply spiritual when you give over to the idea that you really don't control very much. And that is terrifying and liberating at the same time. There's always dissonance. There's always duality in life. The thing I've learned the most, I think the most spiritual insight I can ever share with anyone is there is a duality that sustains life itself. There's this dichotomous tension that keeps us moving and alive. Failure leads to success. Success is destroyed by failure. Memory is beautiful and memory is painful. Both. In one of my books, I said it's like being caressed and spat on at the same time. That's memory. We love our parents, we hate our parents, right? We love our kids. We can't understand our kids and they disappoint us. We have this dissonance, this dichotomous tension, as I said. And one of them is, I love this person, but I have no control over this person. And whether or not this person loves me. And this idea that love, frankly, isn't even enough. If you don't love each other, you can't have a relationship. But just because you love each other doesn't mean you can have a relationship. It's the first 50%, but there's a whole nother piece to it. So I would say that moment, that cold water in my face, that was one. That was one.
That's a big one at a young age.
It was a big one at a young age. It was painful. It was, as I said, sort of slow and extended torture.
Did it lead? It sounds like, because you said so much, and so much came out of, obviously, I'm not going to say so little, because when you're that age, that's like, the end of your world almost. I went through something similar, but it seems like a lot of what you, I don't want to say teach today, because I don't.
Well, it comes partly from that, but partly from other experiences. I was in a really, really frightening car accident and ended up not being able, essentially, to walk. I couldn't walk because my spine was injured, and I'd never felt pain like this in my life. When it really hit me, I was in the car, pulled into the garage, and when I tried to get out of the car, it was like there was a knife in my back, and I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk. And so I opened the door and kind of used my upper body and spilled out of the car onto the garage floor. And then I pulled myself with my upper body across the garage floor, through the oil and all of it, and up 3 steps into the house, which leads directly to my study at home. And that I couldn't move, and I was just begging. I was just fetal and begging. And that taught me a lot. That vulnerability taught me a lot.
When was that?
That was about 12 years ago.
I remember when you were kind of going through the rehabilitation of that, and what a hard time that was for you.
Yes, and I gave, I think, one of my best sermons. It led to one of my books. The book's called More Beautiful Than Before. I don't think you have it there.
During a very hard time in my life, it actually helped me when I needed it the most.
Yeah, More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us. And I guess what these failures teach, and I can tell you, again, I don't know so much that it's a failure as it is making peace with your limitations. My dad was diagnosed at 75 with Alzheimer's.
I remember this.
And there was nothing I could do but love him, of course, and support and protect. But
your dad was your world, I remember.
Well, there's dissonance there too. He claimed me at a very young age. I have 3 older sisters and a younger brother.
Right.
And my younger brother is gay. And the way my dad saw it, not defending it, I'm just telling you how it is it was all on me.
Oh, because I understand.
And he claimed me at a very young age and set me on a path. I was his, and he was frightening in many ways. And of course, so I have this couch in my office I call the couch of tears.
I've been on it a few times.
Yeah, you have. You have. Yeah. So I have not only my own experience, but the vicarious experience of so many others who go through painful things. Now, failure is a source of pain. Pain does not always indicate failure.
Correct.
Right?
Well, the reason, and I want to come back onto this path, but the reason like we use failure, and I came up with the word failure, is like most people think of failure as a terrible thing.
Yes.
You're a failure, right? You failed. And it hit me pretty late in life. When I say late in life, I'm in my late 40s, but I was about 40 something years old. And it just hit me. I had just failed at as you know, my studio. I built a studio from scratch and went into a hostile takeover and put it into a bankruptcy. And I spent 2 years with press literally shitting on me every day, which I later found out was paid for. Press made it even worse by the people doing the hostile takeover.
Yep.
And I always say I was one of those, like, I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning, sheets over, just didn't even want to like look at what was on my phone because I knew it was going to be another article rewritten the same way. And of all people, the person who called me, actually, you'll appreciate this, is Mel Gibson. Called me and said, "Who did you piss off?" He goes, "What I did was a lot worse, and you're getting worse press, and it's getting written over and over and over and over."
Yeah.
Cut from that, where I thought my life was over. I kind of left the film business, went into tech, went into aviation, went into biotech, but most important, had kids. And I woke up one morning and realized this is the happiest I've ever been in my whole life.
Perspective.
But it also was like, had I not failed, I never would have had to push forward to find the next success. When I was 14, I was diagnosed with anxiety disease. And it was like the hardest thing I ever went through. And I've lived it my whole life. And when I was a kid, it wasn't okay. Like, anxiety wasn't a thing. It took 2 years of me telling my parents I have that feeling. And a shrink one day said, he has anxiety disease. And, my dad, like, it's like, no, you don't.
It's a fake disease.
Go do it. That's not real. That's in your brain. And I've my whole life had it. And I actually think back on a lot of the things that I would have, it's interesting because I don't go back and think I wish I would have done something differently. And even recently.
You couldn't have, because you can't have a better past.
I really, you can't. But more than that, I often think, like, okay, well, in this metaphysical world, if I could have had, there's all these different lines and I could have had this alternate timeline, what would I have changed? And it's actually nothing. In my mind, it's nothing. But the one thing I do think about are little things. Like, I didn't do that because I had anxiety. And it's not a big thing I didn't do. It's actions. Like, when I was in business and even the peak of my career, and even when certain things weren't going well, one of the biggest complaints I got was not calling people back. And they thought I was doing it because I thought I was too good or too big, and it wasn't that. It was
you were afraid.
Anxiety. I oftentimes would cancel last minute for a party or an event, and people thought, oh, he's rude. It was anxiety.
Yeah.
To this day.
You were afraid.
Yeah. And I wish, when I think back, that's the thing I wish I could change, is because that I could have changed very easily. It would never have changed an outcome. Maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't. But, it was the fear.
You suffered too long.
I still have it, but I've learned to live with it. And you have it.
I came out about it because I suffered too long. The problem or the challenge of an underlying anxiety disorder is it's also your friend, because I treated every day of work as if it was my last, because I was going to get fired if I didn't crush it, outperform every other rabbi in all of American Jewish history every day, return every call, raise every dime, write books, run a congregation, all driven by anxiety. And so the very thing that makes you successful is the same thing that enslaves you. And that's, again, another duality, right? It's
so
when I
true.
said dualities drive life forward, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So what happened in my case is this was in 2020. Now, I'd had it my whole life. I grew up afraid, in a house full of fear. My dad used to say things like, when I hit, I break bones. Who says that to a 6-year-old?
Yeah, it's tough.
Who says that?
Yeah.
And when I would come home from college, and we weren't poor, we just lived like we were poor. Because my dad grew up on what was then called public assistance, SNAP, essentially. I would come home from college and my dad would say, come here. And we'd walk out in the backyard and he'd say, under that tree, I buried some gold coins. God forbid we should ever have to buy bread. It's like, what? So I have all of this. Always had all of this and never understood it, except it drove me hard. Okay? That's how I did it. You asked, I don't know how you did it all, how you do it all.
Yeah.
That's how. Fear, anxiety. Now, in 2020...
It eventually catches up to you.
Oh, it always catches up to you. I behaved in very dysfunctional ways. I was belittling, I was judgmental, I was tough on the young rabbis around me. Why can't you do what I can do? I grew bitter inside because they couldn't be what I wasn't nice. I got away with it because I was nice externally, but internally, I was burning up. And when I had this car accident, I had the spinal surgery and all of that, I thought, I'm not going to be able to be at work what am I going to do? They're going to get rid of me.
Yeah, that anxiety is the worst.
Okay, so then, in 2020, the day before Trump leaves the White House, the day before, I had stayed above the fray for 4 years. I said to the congregation, I'm not a pundit. I'm not going to talk about these things. It's not productive.
I remember, actually.
Yeah, and I don't know any more than you know.
I remember when you said that.
Yeah, you can read the Wall Street Journal.
Yep.
I can read the Wall Street Journal.
I actually remember it was kind of part of your sermon, but it was kind of before. It was like, I'm not involved in this.
No.
This is not my job.
And this is called a sanctuary for a reason.
Yeah.
We're not going to have it here.
I kind of remember you telling people, like, it's not a place to debate this stuff.
That's right. So then, the day before Trump left the White House, he issued all the pardons. And for the first time in the history of the United States, he also published a list of everyone who wrote a letter supporting the pardon of every person he pardoned.
And you had written a letter?
And I had written a letter for someone.
Who? I bet I can guess who.
I'm sure you can. And he deserved it.
He did deserve it.
Because he changed his life. Because I worked with him. Because I knew the inside of it.
Yeah.
That no one else knew.
Yeah.
And because I understood in a way no one else understood except his family what the consequences of no pardon would have been. And this is a person who changed his life because of his mistakes. And also, I'm not the judge. I'm not the jury.
Right.
I'm not the president.
You're also just writing
I didn't
you
say,
feel.
Yeah.
You said,
I was writing based on experience.
Yeah, I see firsthand witness of a person who deserves something as a rabbi.
That's right. So it gets published, and I had no idea, of course. It never happened before. I would have written the same letter, but I would have been prepared.
Yeah.
And Mara, my social media manager, my phone rings. She says, did I just hear your name on MSNBC? And I said, I don't know. Maybe. Why? And then it starts pouring out. And then, because the hatred for Trump.
People gave you shit for that?
You have no idea.
But you would have written it whether it was a Republican, Democrat,
I would have written it.
And by the way, for someone who's a great family person and deserved it.
I would have written it to Obama for David Geffen, okay?
Yeah,
Not that he needed it, but and they would have thrown a parade for me down Wilshire Boulevard.
Yeah.
But it happened to be Trump, who is obviously a polarizing figure, and a Republican, and people couldn't, they lost their minds. First of all, people in groups lose their minds.
Yeah.
We're seeing that now.
Yeah.
They lose their minds.
Yeah.
I always subordinated the anxiety that was locked in the basement of my psyche with hard work. I just kept working hard, and that kept the anxiety in the basement. It
I know
was
the
always,
feeling.
right? It was always pounding on the ceiling of the basement with a broomstick, like, we're here,
Yep.
we're animating you, but it was locked in the basement. For whatever reason, this experience flung the basement door of my psyche open, and the anxiety rushed out. And I was paralyzed. I lost 10 pounds.
Oof.
I was putting out fires of people who I thought loved and trusted me, but who were so blinded by their hatred and so deeply moved by the people who stood up for me. I had a board member who said, I will not be on a board of a synagogue that tells the rabbi what he can and cannot say. I had people say and do the right things, and I had people who
I
really...
can't believe the board would even question you. Like, what's wrong with that?
It was you try to remember the ethos.
I know
the
it's polarizing, but you weren't supporting a Republican or Democrat, or you were just
people
writing to the president.
People lose their minds. And by the way, I didn't invent the presidential pardon, which I think is a weird thing and probably not appropriate, but I didn't invent it. Anyway, the important thing is that despite that unleashing of an underlying anxiety disorder that I kept suppressed, I had been seeing a psychiatrist since the car accident.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to live like this. I cannot live like this.
It's so debilitating.
So he started me on Zoloft.
Same thing I'm on.
And then, so I take 125 milligrams of Zoloft.
I took 150, I'm down to 100.
Yeah.
But I've whole life been on, I've been on every one of them, and I went through until I found the one that worked.
I think that we should put Zoloft in the water supply like fluoride.
I'm in total agreement with you.
What happened was, I was still suffering, really suffering, and it was getting a little better, and then, I don't know, 8 weeks into it or something, someone said to me, "Hey, Steve, how you doing?" I said, "Great." And then I went,
yeah, it takes
great.
Takes about 2 months to kick in.
Who's that guy? Great. What? So then I decided it was Mental Health Month. There are all these months in America. So it was Mental Health Month, and it was time for me to do one of my Today Show segments. And I said, this is what I want to talk about. I want to tell the truth about what happened to me. And I want to share with people that store-bought is fine. We need to destigmatize. I need these.
Yep.
Or I could never be a rabbi.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. Because we've normalized it.
Yeah.
If you had diabetes, you wouldn't hesitate to take insulin.
No.
You wouldn't. Nobody. Why does this have to be something other than normal?
Fights where, like, he'd be yelling at me for, this, like, it was hard. It was frustrating for them, I'm sure, to see me upset, crying, no idea why. I remember one time I took those pull-up bars that have reverse tension?
Yeah,
so I used it to lock my door against a bed. And my dad was also a triple black belt at karate, so he just kicked my door down.
Yeah.
And, so I remember there were a few instances like that where there was a fear, but also I had this respect because he was so good at everything, right? And so, he wasn't just a scary guy. He never hit me. He never was like, physical, but he was very present.
Did you ever have a fight?
You mean, did I ever
A fist fight?
with my dad?
No.
Oh yeah.
At school?
Oh yeah. I remember the first fight I remember. Actually, no. My dad always reminds me of this fight. So my dad put me in karate starting when I was 6, and he always tells this story. My brother was too. How we were at Paul Revere and high school and at a soccer game, and they look over and there's these older kids, I guess, who were picking on us, and my dad sees it happening like across the field, and he comes walking over, and by the time we get over there, my brother and I had these kids in chokeholds, and they're like, "Get these kids off! They're fucking crazy!" But the real first fight I had, I remember my dad got me a red Saturn. I was very proud of my red Saturn, even though other people made fun of me for it. And it was peppy, a little 5-speed. I remember I pull up next to this M3 and I'm revving in Beverly Hills, and I had a bunch of friends in the car because I was one of the earlier guys to drive in my class. And I go ahead of them, and I kind of remember we were pulling into a deli, and they're like, "Oh, the deli's there," and I kind of cut them off, not meaning to. I go park, friends go running inside, and I get out, Oh, and I remember the back of the BMW had UCLA bodybuilding on the back sticker. And these three guys walk up to me and they're like, hey, you the guy in the red car. And the thing is, nobody had seen a Saturn back then. So a lot of people were asking me what it was. And I'm like, yeah. Bam! I mean, front, back, left, right. I mean, and the guy from the parking lot came running out. He's like, you okay? He's like, that was so loud. It was reverberating in the parking lot. Oh, wow. And so I remember I went home and I told my dad, I'm like, yeah, I got beat up. And he's like, what happened to karate? I was like, I don't know. It just kind of, so he made sure I never got beat up again. He was like, we're going to go, we're going to spar and get back at that. So yeah, then I never lost a fight after that.
That sounds like a scene out of Back to the Future or something like that.
It was bad. I was like, I just remember hitting on the ground, my head's ringing, and I'm like, what hit me? What do I know about Hollywood? Like, I'm a fun guy. And he's like, listen, because all these, like I said, my investors were the who's who in Hollywood. They would bring things that they thought would be good investments to me, and I'd kind of tear them apart or decide to invest in them. And he's like, I've watched you with media deals and this and that. Like, you know more about this finance stuff, and at the time, nobody in Hollywood had finance. So I'm like, listen, the funny part is the only thing my parents ever said to me is, you can do anything you want with your life. You can be a trash man, just be the best trash man you can be, but you can't go into Hollywood. They're like, because my uncle was a producer and his life kind of got really family life and stuff. It was very hard. Just Hollywood's a tough place.
It's tough.
And they didn't want that life for me. So he's like, I'm like, and I don't know anything about Hollywood. And he's like, look, I need you to write a business plan or help me like raise this money and buy this company. And I was like, you want to do an MBO? I still remember him saying, no, I don't want to get my MBA. I was like, no, a management buy. I was like, never mind. I was like, he goes, I'll pay you 50 grand. I was like, done. Needed the money really bad. Wrote the business plan, ran him through it. I raised the money. We bought the company. I owned a big piece of it with him. And then the next crazy thing that happened was the first movie in there was a little movie that had been developed called 300. And it was a graphic novel that Frank Miller had made. And Mark had helped him negotiate a deal at Warner Brothers. And it was kind of a first look deal. And I remember his lawyer was a guy named Jake Bloom, who also recently passed away. He was the most powerful lawyer in the business. You wanted something done, you went to Jake. I mean, the joke was, because Jake used to let me in the inside, he'd be like, he'd represent the producer, the studio head, the actor, the director, but he'd call all of them and just say, okay, we negotiated for 5 days and here's where we ended up, okay? One phone call, because he was representing all of them, right?
Everybody.
So I remember we went into Warner Brothers and Mark made me his guy. He's like, you're my business guy now. And I did all his business. So I actually launched Relativity. I had to come up with a name. And I said, I manage producers. Nobody had managed producers. And I'm like, I'm going to manage producers. So Mark was my first producer, and I owned 10%, I think, of Atmosphere. So anything business, he brought me into. And went into Warner's and pitched Alan Horn, who was the head of Warner's at the time, on 300. And I remember Alan looked and goes, let me get this straight. You guys want to make a movie, sword and sandals, R-rated, blood, you call it comic blood, with the guy that nobody knows who was Phantom of the Opera, because Jerry Butler at the time was the guy behind the mask. That's a period piece for $60 million. And I was like, I remember Mark was like, well, I was like, yeah, that's kind of exactly what we're saying. And so he just starts laughing. I remember we walk out and Jake Bloom, Mark's lawyer, came, looked and I said, I'm going to get this movie made. And Mark, to his credit, had put together this 2-minute animatronic almost, because at the time you didn't really have previs, that just showed this vision that was so good. And do you remember the scene where the arrows are all flying in and just covered? It was that 1-minute scene. I'm like, I got to get this made. And Jake Bloom said to me, Jake Bloom says, this movie will get made when pigs fly. So, there's a lot of science and metaphysics and religion have kind of all started to converge in an interesting way. And we know that there's a field that connects us all, quantum entanglement.
Right.
And so we know that things go faster than the speed of light, even though that's completely impossible. It means that we're connected by something we can't see. I think we used this analogy before, which is like we're in an ocean. Right. We're like fish in an ocean, we just don't know, right? So I actually believe that, and I firmly believe this, and this might get a little voodoo-y, and I was like the person that you asked me when I was 25, I'm like, oh, I'm an atheist. I don't really, mumbo jumbo. I was like very science. I was very like, we're born, somehow, chemicals came together. We were, it worked. It was a one-time event. We're going to die and that's it. Not anymore. I actually feel and believe very firmly that there is a field. And Einstein believed this to a unified field, call it, but a field that connects all of us, all living things, I'll call it the heaven, the earth, the stars, the moon, the people, the animals, the plants. And yoga is a way of tapping into it. And there's multiple ways of tapping into it. But it's tapping into various parts. And I think you go back to like the old yogis where they have, your various, they call it, points, but your chakras or whatever you want to call
chakras,
it.
Yeah, 8 chakras.
But it's different points in your body that I think actually are those points that somehow physically, or I'll call more metaphysically, are connected to the universe. And as we explore more and more in science and medicine, we're actually realizing that is happening. There is this gland here, the pineal gland, and it does look like an eye. Like when you go pull it out, it is made of the same material as an eye, and it calcifies. So the older you get, the more it calcifies. Yeah. And if you can figure out how to get oxygen in there, it decalcifies. We don't know what the pineal gland does. Like we still don't know what its purpose is, right? And I mean, we know some of it, obviously, right. But we know so little about the way that energy moves through us and how it connects to everything else. Like, do you know we don't know what 98% of the universe is made up of? We can't see it. 98%. We only see 2% of what's around us, right?
Yeah, it makes it interesting.
So I believe that yoga, that meditation, that even, you don't have to call it that even, but that looking inside and finding that inner voice, that inner strength that sometimes comes from nowhere.
Right.
And it comes from everywhere.
Right.
Me and my good friend Dwayne.
Yeah.
D-Wade, Hall of Famer.
D-Wade's awesome.
He's into yoga now, right? But the first time that I took him to yoga, I was explaining to him that, like, it's gonna challenge you because it's you versus you.
Yeah.
And at one point I looked over at him and I seen him he was eyeing the door.
He wanted to leave.
He wanted to leave, but I was looking and I was like, I know but this is how his inner channel, because he's failed so much to become successful, right? We went and had coffee after, and he was sharing the moment, and he knows this. He was like, it took everything in me to not negotiate with myself, because he was like, I gotta go to the restroom. Maybe I gotta get some water. Think about all the excuses that you can come up with to get out.
Yep.
But he didn't. And that's
what makes him him.
That is a fierce desire inside of you. And we all have it in us until we put in the situation, we don't know that we have it. So that's why failing is very important. And that's why the show is so important.
So it brings me to that saying, necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yep.
And I was just reading articles about some of the biggest breakthroughs we've had, whether it's in like science or medicine or tech. It comes from, they call it necessity. I call it like you say, what are your options? It's almost like a desperation of some sort, but a desperation of not like, oh my God, I don't know what to do, but a desperation of like, I got to figure this out. I got no other choice but to figure it out.
I got no other choice.
And that leads to it's impossible, but that leads to like, we got to change it.
That's why you hear a lot of guys' stories and women's stories in Hollywood of like being homeless, right? Being homeless is like a figure piece. People lock in on that.
Yep.
But to be honest with you, they didn't have no more options.
Yep.
And they really crafted. They really was driven. That everything was gone. They had no more options. Go home.
Yeah.
Go back to where you came from.
And only then.
The story. So you watch all these people that are successful and they're like, yeah, I was homeless. And people like, man, they were homeless. But what transpired in being homeless? He had no options.
What got him there? What was he thinking?
And that's how the director that you gave the second chance to.
Same thing.
You not only gave him an open door, you gave him a platform and he just said, I'm out of here. Boom.
So, something that we were just talking about we kind of going down this path. You know, you obviously are known, not just known, you are the guy in basketball, and not just the NBA, but I think as we're getting into in all basketball, because there's a lot more than just NBA, right? And I think it's opening up more and more and more. You know, there's more jobs for basketball players internationally than there is domestic.
Absolutely.
And there's plenty of money, and it ain't like, you know, I hate to say it, but it ain't like the playing in the minor leagues baseball. No, you're actually, you go make real money.
You can make real money.
And it's a great gig.
Yeah, some of my international players play in Barcelona.
So, I mean, you get to live in Barcelona? Oh no, I have to live in Barcelona.
Greece. I got players that are playing in places that, you know, when you're in Turkey, in certain parts of Turkey, and, you know, in Australia. And, you know, the Australian league is played during their summertime. So right now it's summer in Australia. It's winter here.
It's summer there.
Summer there. People don't know this. Oh man, you gotta go to Australia. And the guy like, yeah, I gotta go. Don't come over. And
it's like the best weather ever.
It's the best weather ever. And you know, in Japan and China, you know, I have the MVP of the Chinese basketball league, Eric Moreland, for the last 2 years. He's MVP and they won the championship. And
China basketball is as big as U.S. now. It just took off, right?
It did very well. Europe to me is still one notch under the NBA.
Yep.
They teach the game very well. They play very well. When I was on the flight coming back from Dubai, I actually watched an international game, and man, it was so good to watch. And I seen in the game, it was 8 players that have all been drafted in the NBA. All been drafted.
So they're literally basically catching up quickly.
Yes. And the crowd play, the jumping up and down and the interactions. And, you know, so now with streaming and everything, you get a more of an inside look of international.
So you think it's Europe? Do you think it goes US, Europe? Is China after that, or is it?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's Europe, China, Australia, Japan. And then you have other places like Puerto Rico is taking off with the 3-month league.
Yep.
And so with the 3-month league is right between, so you can actually play in the other leagues and still
you don't have to be just in
the one league.
So we did, we bought Fight TV like, I don't know, 2 years ago, and we did a deal with Cube, and we were doing the Big Three.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we did that for a year, which was a lot of fun. I mean, listen, that's hard to put together.
It is hard to put together.
Did you work with them at all?
Well, I was talking with his son a little bit, and a lot of the players. So you have players that didn't know they was retired. Okay, let me explain that.
Yeah.
Like that means they didn't get picked up, and they're like, I'm just gonna wait, and then a year go by, you don't get picked up again. There's no celebration at the end.
Nope.
And so these are the guys.
There's no retirement
There's
party.
no retirement party. Only 2 or 3 guys I know for sure, and we talk about it. Kobe had one.
Yep.
Dwayne had one, and Shaq didn't get one.
He didn't?
No. It's only gonna be a few other guys else.
Wow. What about Kareem?
I think Tim Duncan had the farewell.
Yeah.
And I think they gave Dirk a little bit of one. You know, but most of the guys I deal with and work with for years, they're retired without even knowing they're retired. That transitional period.
So that's, before we go to, I know I'm interrupting my own question, but that's really interesting about failure, because so you got guys, and like I said, I feel like for a minute in time, I kind of felt what they felt, for their whole careers. But they're on top of their game. They're everywhere they go, they're the best, they're defined by basketball. They're defined by not just basketball, but they're almost like an actor, right? They're defined by the character they made themselves in basketball on the court.
On the court.
And even they might not be that person off the court, but they kind of, as you said, unless they pivot, they kind of get stuck in that character.
Yeah, you got to detach.
But then they wake up and they don't know they're retired. And
they don't even know.
They have to hit this realization that like their entire life, which has been basketball up until that point in time, right? Like you can't be one of the 60 without having dedicated your life to that, right? And defined yourself by it. At least for a period of time.
For a long period of time.
And now you wake up and you're not that guy anymore. And what happens? Like you see that's failure, right?
That's failure. And it's failure that can lead to depression, substance abuse. It can send you into a spiral, right? It can really mess you up unless you've worked on your pivot. Here's some things that we can educate and give athletes that are young, that are watching this. We can give them some advice that they can take, right?
That's what I was gonna ask you. Like,
Stop turning down meetings. Stop turning down meetings. Stop turning down the opportunity to shake hands while you could put your jersey on. There's so many business opportunities that are presented to people that are making really good money, and they wake up and say, I don't want to do it. I'm looking at the bank account. I got enough money. Why would I do this? Why would I meet this person? Why would I go to dinner with this person? Because when the ball stops bouncing, you can't get that meeting anymore. If the football stopped throwing, the baseball, you look at every sport, when you cannot put that jersey on no more, those doors and those opportunities that you had, they're closed. You can no longer get that phone call that you can get when you put that jersey on, because people want to meet the character.
Yep.
So my advice to young athletes in all sports, young actors, actresses, whatever you're doing that's pushing forward, take every meeting, treat everyone with respect, treat everyone with dignity, take it and be pure and enjoy the process. Because at the end, you're going to be faced with people not taking your phone calls, and you will not be able to pivot because you didn't answer their phone calls when they were calling you.
that is not just in basketball.
That's in everything.
I could tell you that the calls and meetings I could get when I was running the studio, they changed a lot when I wasn't running the studio. You know, guys that were my dear friends, of course, loved me so much, right?
That's,
And,
and if you didn't know how to handle that, I talk to guys all the time, like, they calling me, hey, Chris, listen, I know you know such and such.
Yeah.
I'm like, bro, you make 250 million.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, you realize that money's not everything. Resources not everything. Having access.
Access is more, it's very important. And it's funny because I make a joke now. So when I had that 2-year period or year-and-a-half period where I was like, I was the pariah because the press said so. And then I got the studio back, right? And people started calling again. And I'd make this, even to this day, once I did Triller and I did the Tyson fight and things, people I hadn't talked to in forever that called themselves my friends, I'd get a phone call. They'd be like, hey, how you been? I'd be like, I've been great. I was trying to reach you. I was like, oh, you must have had my old number. Yeah, I was like, I haven't changed it since I was 18. And they just go quiet.
Boom. I say that all the time. People see me. I could be in the airport and it's like, Chris, I was trying to reach you. I was like, and I hit, if you with me, I was like, they're finna lie. Because my number is the same number since I was in college.
Me too.
I have the same number.
And by the way, you can't forget my number. Like,
my number, you can't forget it.
It's only got 2 digits in
And
it.
so people, when they say, man, I've been trying to get a hold of you on social media. I'm
you're
like, whoa.
Yeah.
No, I got the same phone number. So that means that I'm accessible and I want to work with everyone.
See, I learned the lesson the hard way, but I also learned the lesson the hard way because I didn't practice what you were saying. I mean, I was young, not an excuse, but I'm 26 years old being told, you're the king of the world, you control Hollywood. And so I didn't take all the meetings and I didn't take all the phone calls. And there's a lot of people that I didn't return the call. And so I don't blame those people today. I don't blame if they're like, fuck him.
Right.
He didn't give you the time of day when he was there, fuck him. They have every right to say that.
Absolutely.
But the people who I was working with day in, day out that I gave their first director job to or act or whatever, they like disappeared and then showed back up and then they pretend like they're trying to reach me. I'm just like, nah, man, I'm not playing that game. But
that's good advice for the younger people.
You got to just surround yourself with the people. Like, loyalty is really important, right?
It is.
And the older I get, the more I realize the less friends I actually have.
Absolutely.
It's not that less people are around, but I realize what is a friend, right? Like, and who do I want to be around? I don't need someone around that's just telling me what I want to hear, because maybe they think they're going to get something or they meet someone they want to meet. No, like a friend is a person who's actually going to tell you what you don't want to hear.
Absolutely.
But you like them around because they love you, and you love them, and they don't need anything from you, and you don't need anything from them. And
that's when the door's really open.
Yeah.
When I don't need nothing from anyone. So when I go into the room, expecting nothing. So when I go into meetings, when I go into places, my expectation for other people, I don't have any.
Right.
I'm
That's
really
the best.
open-minded to it. My expectations for myself are very high. The way I carry myself, my presentation, the way, you know, I want to be in a position where people can speak about me when I leave the room. And that is so important about how you carry your name and those things. And that's how I got to where I am. I know we was talking about the MVP.
Yes, so that's exactly where I wanted to go. Is MVP, your motto, your training, and I think this is so pertinent. I know you use it for players, but it seems like it would be more pertinent to the players who just are figuring out they're retired, they didn't know they were retired, than the players who are in the game. And it would be more important to the people watching this who are trying to figure out their next step in life.
Absolutely.
Or maybe they just failed at something, whether it's they didn't get the job they wanted or the school they wanted to get into, or it could be basketball, it could be sport.
It could be anything.
Whatever they perceive they failed. And you have a program
Yes.
that you're launching, or
Yes.
launched, sorry.
Launched.
That, like, I didn't even realize I lived by, but when you explained it, I'm like, oh, I live by that.
Yeah.
Tell us about MVP.
So MVP is meditation, visualization, and positive self-talk. You know, it takes at least 5 minutes a day. It could be longer depending on how much time you have, but it takes about 2 minutes a day to meditate. Meditation can be open eye meditation, or it can be closed eye meditation. So you can literally be driving in your car and you could be meditating, working on your breath work and breathing.
Before we go to the V, maybe you can give the audience, for those people who might not have learned meditation, I'm lucky that I
Yes.
had a teacher. Actually, we'll talk about it. My teacher was one of the Maharishi's disciples, which is awesome. I know you're really into
one
that.
of those teachers.
I have him, Tom Knoll. You'll love him. But instead, I said, like, a lot of people either don't have the patience to listen to something for 8 hours, or a teacher, or go to the David Lynch Fund, or whatever it is, right? What's your advice to those people? How do they learn to just meditate for 2 minutes when they're driving? What's the best method, or do you have a method?
I do. And I use sports always as an analogy because I feel like everyone around the world at some point has been a part of a sport, right? I call it mental timeouts, okay? A mental timeout, and let's use a basketball game because I'm a basketball expert.
And most people
easy.
understand basketball too. So.
It's easy. In basketball, you have different types of timeouts. You have a quick timeout, 30 seconds, right? You have a full timeout, a minute or so. You have a TV timeout, media timeout, right? That's about 1:30, right? At the end of each quarter, you have a timeout. At the halftime, there's a timeout. Now with the NBA, they're able to challenge plays. So that's another timeout.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So if I really want to manipulate the game, I can call a timeout, go in and next play and challenge it and get another timeout.
And make your timeout longer.
To give this guy a rest.
Yeah.
If you notice, those timeouts all had different types of time frames.
Yeah.
Right? So in meditation, your meditation doesn't have to be long. When I didn't understand meditation, I thought meditation was something else. And I was like, what? Meditation is really just being mindful of where you are and who you are and just really clearing your mind. It's so simple to meditate, but taking a mental timeout, and I'll go into more of that and after I finish the MVP, is it can happen in your car.
Yep.
So I could pull up at home and I've had a 16-hour work day and I want to be ready for the kids. I'm going to practice MVP. I'm going to meditate in the car about 2 minutes.
So you meditate,
visualize. So now, like before I got here, as I lost my phone call right when I got on the hill. I was in a phone call with a company that's trying to create a partnership. I wanted to be prepared, so I started practicing my MVP. I was visualizing sitting here, visualizing walking through the door, engaging with people. I only took 2 minutes, and the guy pulled up behind me. He was looking in the car, but I couldn't even really pay attention, even though I could see him in my peripheral, because I was visualizing how I would be today, right now, on the podcast.
You basically can't sue someone for talking shit if you're what they call a public figure. Like, I'm sure you've come across this. Like,
Yep.
People could say whatever the hell they want.
It's also the biggest problem with social media, though, too, is that every keyboard warrior in the world has a microphone that people listen to. So it's like you can just propagate bullshit, and if it sticks, it sticks.
It's tough because everybody's a critic and everybody's a Monday morning quarterback. And it was like, I'd built what I'll still say today is, I think in Hollywood, the most prolific change that Hollywood had ever seen. And like, I fought the world because nobody wanted it to happen there. And I remember I was telling this to Nigel last podcast. I remember Mel Gibson calling me up because I'd helped him when he went through his really hard time, and nobody in Hollywood would talk to him, and I did. And I was Jewish, and people who weren't Jewish wouldn't talk to him because of his anti-Semitic supposedly comments he made. And he said, "Dude, I didn't even get as much shit." He's like, well, "Who'd you piss off?" They're rewriting the same story over and over every day, and it was like I didn't want to get out of bed. I remember like I pull the covers off and just dreaded looking at my phone to see like what was published. That's the hardest time ever because we were talking about earlier, failing for yourself is like you fail for yourself. But when you fail in front of the whole world and you trip in front of the whole world, that's all you can see, right? And you think it's like over because you think like, oh, the whole world just saw me fail. I literally like everybody knows me as a failure. I mean, that's how I felt. I don't know if you.
No, it feels like that.
When I went anywhere, even though nobody probably was saying anything about me, I felt like, oh, they're all talking about me. They're all talking about what a failure I am. Did you feel that way? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, it's like I'm on social media, so it's like anywhere I went, anyone that had TikTok would just see me, and that's like the first thing that they would say. I
mean, in your case, the whole world was actually talking about you everywhere you went. In my case, I just thought they were. So, okay, you took that, and in a, obviously, nobody expected. I think you at some point said you were never going to fight again. And all of a sudden, you decided not only were you going to fight, but you were going to fight in the hardest sport there ever was. And definitely the most gruesome and definitely the most physically challenging and definitely the most dangerous in bare knuckle boxing, which is boxing with no gloves. You know, obviously having done social media and regular fights and, you know, I did all of Jake's original fights. Like, you know, we picked opponents with Jake that were, you know, people who had been retired in their 40s. Jake was in his young 20s. They were kind of out of shape. They had lost their last 5 or 6 fights. They'd never boxed. So it was somewhat of a fair fight. You came out, and I don't think anybody ever did it before. I don't know if anybody will ever do it again, but you came out and said, no, I want to pick a fighter in his prime that's 3-0, who's about my age, who is actually a bare knuckle, not just a boxer, but an actual bare knuckle boxer 3-0, named the Cut Man, and fight him in real life.
I thought it was the worst idea ever.
Like, what was going through your head? Like, tell me how the failure of in front of the whole world led to you doing something that, like, if you walked in that ring and lasted 3 seconds and got knocked out, the world would have given you respect.
That's what my brain was thinking when I went in there. It was like a win-win situation for me. I had the balls to step into like a bare knuckle boxing ring against somebody in their prime. If I lost, it was expected. If I won, shocks the world. I remember seeing clips of bare knuckle, like with Mike Perry, Luke Rockhold, like Eddie Alvarez, Chad Mendes, like all the old UFC fighters doing it. And I remember seeing it like all over my timeline because of how gruesome, bloody, and viral like this shit would go.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Brad that I wanted to do it. And he said that it was a dumb idea.
He called me and said, because for those you don't know, we own bare knuckle. Brad was actually at more or less bare knuckle 1 with me. So, and I still remember he was shaking because you and Brad have in common that he also grew up fighting a lot.
Well, the adrenaline in that,
And
when you're in those fights, it's like...
We went to this, we're sitting there the very first fight, and I just remember being in the front row and you hear this, right? Which
You
don't
hear every contact.
And I looked over and Brad was like, I'm like, you okay? He's like, yeah, I just like feel like I'm in a fight. Like, but tell me, so you took this, the whole world is like, you become a meme, the whole world is like fucking descending down upon you and kind of saying, you know, all right, Bryce, like ha ha ha, you're the guy who could fight, and now you're stepping in the ring. And tell me about that. What was going through your head, the journey, everything you can remember?
I was so hungry throughout my entire camp, but I trained my ass off. Like actually worked with like Lorenzo Hunt, the 2-time BKFC champ, 185 and 205. He showed me like the difference between boxing and BKFC with like the little bit of wrestling that you can do. So working with him gained my confidence, but I was so hungry. I wasn't really thinking of G. Perez. I wasn't thinking of the fighter himself. So I wasn't really nervous at all. But then once I had my meal after my weigh-in, and then I was fully like regenerated, I started thinking, I'm like, oh shit, this fight's tomorrow. my nerves are kicking in like crazy. I'm always like antsy, like bouncing my legs, like, oh God, like I'm actually about to do this. Day of the fight comes along. I'm not allowed to leave my dressing room. They're like, you can't walk around. So I was sitting there for about 2.5 hours, just watching all of the fights, watching all these people get their face battered up. I'm trying to get both of you guys in the back room, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to do this.
I remember that.
Watching those fights in the locker room was like, it's not a good idea.
Yeah, no.
I wish those weren't on. And then one of the girls who was right before Bryce stuck her face in.
I remember she
stuck
teeth.
her face in and said hi, and all of her teeth were gone. Her face looked like she had been through a blender. She's like, "Don't worry, you'll do great." And I was like, "Oh my God."
Well, actually, if I remember what she did. She stuck her head in because I remember I was trying to calm you down. I was giving you military breathing exercises, if you remember, like making you meditate. And she stuck her head in, and she's like, "OnlyFans, here I come!" And she had all her teeth gone and bloody, and she was making a joke, but she literally looked like she'd gotten.
Yeah. So no,
Really?
like the nerves were so fucking heavy there. I was freaking out. Started warming up. The nerves went away for a little bit. And then the guy goes, like every single fight, the guy would come in and say like, "All right, you're in 3. All right, you're in 4 fights. All right, you're in 2 fights. All right, you're next." And it's like so fast. It was going so fast. I was like, oh my God, like I'm about to do this. And I'm sitting there about to do my walkout, shitting bricks, like doing the breathing. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I doing?
Dude, you told me. You said, "What the fuck am I doing, man?" I was like, "It's not too late. It's not too late."
You know? And then as I'm doing the walkout, instant character goes back into it. I'm like, I'm in. So I walk out there, I'm doing like this thing. I'm like doing the Conor McGregor walk, but on the inside, shitting bricks. I step in there, I greet you, Dave Feldman, like the refs. I then gave like G a little head nod. I was like, all right, please don't hurt me. And then I'm sitting across from him. Lorenzo's like behind me as they're doing the intros. And he's like, all right, you're good. You got this. Remember what we trained for. Breathe. And he's like doing all this shit. And I'm like, okay, I'm more scared of Lorenzo than I am G Perez. If I lose in front of Lorenzo, he'll probably kick my ass.
It's a good motivation.
And our entire game plan was like move around the ring. And as soon as he comes in, I hit him. And in the first 10 seconds, he came into my range. And that's when I dropped him in the first 10 seconds. And that right there clicked in my head. I'm like, I won. That was all I needed. That's the clip that everybody's going to see. I won.
So then the pressure was off,
Yeah.
And then you were just like,
But then
now there's no winning.
Yeah, but then he kept fucking hitting me, and I was like, oh wow, this guy's hitting me really hard. So I remember one time he uppercutted me 4 times in the right eye or in the left eye, and my vision was completely slanted. And I was looking at him, and he was like coming towards me, like while I'm looking at him like this. I'm like, oh my fucking God. I was like, I'm either gonna get knocked out right now, or I'm gonna foul this guy and like hurt him. so I grabbed him by the legs, picked him up, and just threw him. And I was like, all right, I bought myself some time. He's like grabbing the back of his head. I don't remember hitting the back of his head, but he was grabbing the back of his head. I was like, yes, I have time. All right, vision, come back, because my vision was still completely slanted. Like he hit my eye in the right spot like 4 times, so my vision was just like sideways.
I was wondering, I never asked you why you did that. And
Yeah.
then now I know. Like I remember when you basically wrestle moved him.
Yeah.
Like
It was because I couldn't see. The entire first round I couldn't see.
Wow. So back to before the fight though, like, so this is a common theme in your life. You started, so you became this social media star phenomenon because, you basically had kind of, I'll say failed as a broad term on our show, but you failed at, being popular and having friends. And you had all these bullies that you had this just feeling inside that you wanted to change. And as I kind of said, we talked about earlier, if you can't change your outside, change your inside. So you went and created your own world, made your own world using that as your motivation, the failure in high school, right? And you become one of the most famous people in the world and very successful. And then you go to the next level to become a boxer, and you become overnight, like, as you said, the biggest meme, and, like you couldn't go anywhere without being the boxing guy that lost, basically. But again, instead of giving up, and that's kind of what the show is about, is for anybody who's ready to give up and thinks like, oh, I failed. Well, you didn't fail, you just had a failure, and success is the things you find between failures and not giving up. And so you turned around and instead of saying, I'm never fighting again, which you did say for a minute, but you're like, inside you knew, you're like, I got to go do something bigger and harder. So it motivated you to go train so hard that you decided to go into BKFC. And basically, because in your head you won, you actually once again willed it to happen. You took that failure and in your head willed success, and you actually knocked him out and you became a BKFC fighter.
Kind of badass.
Yeah. How's that feel now?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's actually, nobody even mentions the Austin McBroom shit anymore.
Focus on microtransactions, because I don't have control over what's going on overseas. I don't have control, like all this news that comes in, and it's all these things that get you upset and depressed. And I just say, if people just all focused on their microtransactions, being decent with one another, to one another, you know, whether it's the barista at the coffee shop or the person at Target, or, you know, just if we just all were just decent to one another, things would get better. But even if we're not, that's something I know I can control. And I think, you know, there's a great saying. It's someone in the Tony Robbins camp said it, but what got you to Egypt won't necessarily get you to the promised land. And one of the things that drove me was anger. So it was my gas. That was my fuel. I was, and I always, whether something would happen to a talent, I knew Maria, Mercedes, you know, if they got rejected, I would say, you know what, that's okay. That's on us. We clearly haven't shown you who the F we are. Let me show you now. So with Maria, it was just like, oh, okay. Now, every time whoever's messed with her, every time you pump gas, you're seeing Maria. Every time you go to the movie theater, you're going to, and so I was driven by, and same with Mercedes. It's like, oh no, you're going to have like more money than you can ever imagine. You're going to be treated like you should be. All good, but it also compromised my health. I realized it was eating away at me. And so that was got me to Egypt. And so now it's finding new ways to motivate me, which is not that, all right, the justice, like, all right, I'll show you. Like it is, you must know from athletes, it's good, right? Like Jordan and Kobe and Bird, like they were like so driven in that way, but right, what it was like, I'll show you, like, and my wife, so was a huge sports fan too, which guys, you'll love Maria. But Maria, what she liked Magic and Sugar Ray and Shaq, because Kevin, she's like, they knew how to turn it on and then turn it off. Like in the game, they're in it, but then they're out and they're happy. And she's like, I'm sorry, I've seen Larry out, I've seen Michael out, and they're still carrying it, the
You know, the one thing that I try to give young guys is I try to give them characters like Marvel, right? Even with young kids. And so we talk about us even being characters in life and understanding who your characters are, right? And I think that helps people be able to turn on a journal, because when you go into character mode, you're not that person, but in that moment,
got it. Yes.
person. So I encourage young people to find superheroes that they identify with.
Right.
And when you're going into feeling the fear and you're going into competition, you actually step outside of who you are and become that character. And then now, as the game closes and everything is over, you let the character go, because you can't be an asshole to your shed, to your driver.
Yeah.
You can't carry the moment of the game and put it on everyone.
You can be, but it leads to a very toxic.
It's very toxic.
I mean,
and then because I've seen people fuel themselves with, I got cut from this AAU team, and that's their motive. And I mean, they can get them really going. Like I say, get it going.
Yeah.
It can get them really going. Or nobody wanted me. And that's all they got to do is they can look in the mirror.
Right.
Nobody wanted me. Write it down. So for oh, you didn't draft me. So certain people, they find this one thing.
Well, Jordan, right? He didn't make his varsity team, right? And that was it.
That was his it. I have to ask him
Right.
and find out what was his thing. Something like you said, anger.
Like Bird's father killed himself, like, and then Bobby Knight abused him, like they all have their like
things that get people to greatness.
But I like the idea of putting the cape and cowl over to the side.
So you can still be who you are. It's just that you is finding what character you want to be in your own movie.
That's the beauty of why when we do this, because what Chris has on the court is always applicable to life,
Yes.
right? And so we look at life as court.
Sports is the best reality show going.
And so
It is.
all these things that Chris uses with his characters, we bring it and we try to bring it to life. Actually, I'm going to keep forgetting to bring up is, do you have like scientists in the family or doctors? Like,
No, they're all like,
well,
they're confused by me. My mother literally said to me, I think it was like a year ago, she goes, remember when you first went to Hollywood, you were an extra on General Hospital? It was like a day thing. I'm like, yeah, would you ever do that again? I'm like, no, Mom, I don't think so. Yeah, they have no, God love them, they have no clue.
you explain. And you said, you just one day sat down and you're like, I'm going to go over the last, whatever, 6 hours and figure out what did I watch that made me upset? What did I eat that made me feel bad?
Yeah.
But like, I didn't want to make me feel bad, but like, so you followed the Socratic method. I don't know if you realized you literally do.
Oh, no.
So when a scientist is doing an experiment, right? Or a doctor who follows a similar method, and they go in and they want to figure out like, how do I recreate it? So they literally have to go and dissect every single thing that led up to it, right? So if they're like, hey, I just figured out how to, isolate the Higgs boson, which is, they call it the God particle, and it's the particle they think that everything comes from, and they discovered it and not discovered it, they knew it existed, but they found it and saw it for the first time in 2011. To do that, they have to go back and look at every little detail. What did they do to get to that step? And what did they not do to get to that step? And what did they do to fail? And what did they do? And it's like down to the greatest little piece. And you're doing that with life. And that's why I asked about scientists, because when you said it, I'm like, oh, he's using science in life. You're like, I looked at a day where I felt bad and I went backwards and I said, what did I watch? What did I, who did I listen to? Like, who did I speak to? And then kind of you adjust like you would in an experiment, the variables you put into the experiment to say, okay, well, that didn't find me the Higgs boson. That made me feel unhappy. So let me take out what I ate. Did that work? No, I still feel unhappy. Let me take out that podcast I listened to.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I feel better now. Am I super happy? No, but I don't feel bad. Okay, today I was happy that day. Okay, what did I do? Well, I watched this and I ate that. Okay, then let me go watch that. And let me go eat that. Oh, now I'm happy. So I know watching that and that is literally what a scientist does in an experiment to figure out like the end result of an experiment.
Take the data of your life.
No, you did, but you did. And you explained it. You literally sat down and you charted out an experiment of your life. And you're like, I'm going to figure out what makes me happy.
And even, another thing, driving in LA with some of my cars, I just enjoy it. And so, but, and Maria fights with me all the time, but okay. And I'm always trying to find, I call the regular guy workaround, and then sometimes I have to remind Maria too, like, Maria, you're very wealthy and you're very successful. But remember when we were in a basement and had nothing, I'm always trying to find that, whether it's you could take a bath with Epsom salt, but even my cars, I don't have, you kind of you laugh at my car collection. In Hollywood, everyone's got the Ferraris and the Porsches, this, that. Like, my cars are like 10 to 15 grand. They're classic cars, but I enjoy I like waxing them, washing them. I like driving them, but that makes me happy. And I said, so I tell Maria, like, Maria, that drive I do to my studios on Burbank Boulevard in NoHo, I'm like, I really enjoy that. So guess what? I'm going to do that drive with my Thunderbird convertible, and like, I'm just, and so those are like little things that put me in a good place that I wouldn't have, but for like not in the bougie way. I'm always trying to find the way to make, to do it that is within means, because the other thing, and I learned this from Marvin Hagler. Do you remember Marvin? He's way before your time, right? But it's funny because Marvin and Sugar Ray, so Marvin was more like of the Jordan, Larry Bird, couldn't let it go, and I think it's what killed him. He was, you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't let it go, and Sugar Ray talks about it too, but a Boston guy. And so when I was really young, he was at a bar, and he was dancing, and he was with a girl, his girlfriend at the time, and I remember just being in awe. It's Marvin Hagler. It's the greatest middleweight in boxing, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And anyway, so I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Haggard, can I buy you a drink just so I can say buy a drink? He's like, yeah. He's like, yeah. He's like, come here. I don't bite. So we started talking. I said, well, can I ask you this question? I'm like, I'm kind of confused because you're here, like you're just with your girlfriend here alone. And he's like, oh, he's like, you're looking for my entourage. He's like, if my driver, my this, my that, my this. He's like, let me tell you something. He goes, I don't need a bodyguard, obviously. I'm Marvin Hagler. He's like, I can drive myself. I can this and that. He said, but he's really, he's like, all that stuff is going to go away. It's all temporary. He's like, what happens with Muhammad and these other people that had these big, all this around them, and then when it eventually goes away, they're massively depressed. He's like, so I work every day to try to keep myself as close to where I used to be before I made it. So then I know I'm never going to feel failure after it's gone. I'm always going to be okay. And so to this day, my favorite car, which your producer borrowed for about a year, is my 2005 Ford Ranger that I love and I drive every day. And I got my Timberlands here, my Dickies, and like I really did. And Maria sometimes fights with me about it because she's like, you need to step your game up. You need to wear like better clothes to these things. And I'm like, Maria, I never want to go there. And that's why I was never afraid. Not only not having kids, I was never afraid because I knew the person across the table was afraid to lose their beach house, their shoe collection. So when I had to protect Maria, and the only two times I ever had to go nuclear in this business, they were like, no, this lady, she's crazy. She kills everyone in the business. I go, no, she's not. She's got you all fooled. That's her game. She doesn't want to lose her beach house, her shoe collection, or this guy doesn't want to. And I'm going to bring it to him because I'm not afraid to lose any of that. We'll take the red pickup. We'll go home, honey. We'll go back to Boston. Yep. We have enough for a little 2 or 3 bedroom condo, and we're JFF, just effing fine. And guess what? And guess what? Who always folded? The other side table went, I'm out. But I was never afraid, and I'm still not, because I know at the end of the day, but I learned that from Marvin Hagler. He was like, I'm good without all this stuff. I don't need it.
It is. I actually went through it twice. And I became the guy with all the
right, yeah, I know.
And learned not just that I'm not scared to not have it, but that stuff actually keeps you from happy in a certain way. And so it's interesting. I launched a hedge fund when I was 20 years old.
I can't believe your story. I can't believe your story. Like I would think, I mean, I didn't wake up until I was like 34 to start like take it, you know.
I actually didn't wake up till I was in my 40s, and I'll explain why. But what I mean by that, but when I was 20, I launched the hedge fund. I left Dean Witter and launched the hedge fund, and I had the who's who in the business. My investors, from Kirk Kerkorian to, Sumner to Michael J. Fox, to Jerry Bruckheimer, to Brian Granger, to Jake Bloom, you name it, they were my investors. And I was doing private equity and derivatives trading. And, I did everything that a 22-year-old with too much money would do. Bought it. Still remember walking in and buying my Ferrari 360 Modena. I bought a 3-story modern house in the hills. I hate modern houses, by the way. You don't know what you like in 22, but I fucking will
I hate them too.
In a modern
they're so depressing. I know.
But the most modern you ever could buy, not just modern, it was what I call Asian modern. So it was even simplicity modern.
Yeah, big, open, empty. Yeah.
Open, 3-story, a tennis court, a basketball court, a pool the size of, whatever. And the market crashed in 2001, and I had to shut my hedge fund down. And I literally went from like that, because I put everything I had back into my business. And I owned half my hedge fund. And I still remember going to my dad and saying, like, what should I do? And my dad's like, so the companies we invested in, actually, ironically, they all ended up making it. Pretty funny story, some 20 years later. But my dad said, you got to take your ownership and give it to your investors, because these are all going to have down rounds and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that's all I have. Saying all I have is your name.
Yeah.
So I literally gave basically everything I had back to my investors. Yeah. And moved into a 1-bedroom. I'm 3 years old, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I'm obsessed with physics. So I started reading physics books. So I started applying to physics programs. And I remember I walked outside to this teeny little patio, walked outside and laid a little physics book and I laid up. And I think I maybe like was trying to figure out if I had enough money to buy dinner that night. And I was like, I'm the happiest I've been in like 5 years. Right. I mean, I didn't have kids. I didn't have a wife.
Yeah.
It was me. I only had to care about me. But I was like, you know, I remember being in that giant house at night, freaked out of my own house. You know, there's like ghosts in the hall and going like needed people over because I didn't want to be alone and,
Right.
you know, having parties all the time. So when I made it, I'll call it the second time in Hollywood, um, I remember my business manager at the time he passed away, Bob Philpott, who was the salt of the earth. He had said to me, I wish all my clients were as easy to do because I remember I said to him, when I started to make a little bit of money, I knew I wanted to be on the beach. I rented a beach house for, you know, I think a lot of people think it's a lot of money, but not a ridiculous amount of money. Like it was a 2,800 square foot beach house. That was my full-time house. I had one car. And I'm like, I told him that's all I need. And he was like, I go, why do I need to do anything else? This is like for me perfect. And he was like, I wish every one of my clients would you know would do that and would understand that. And to me, I did end up just without even meaning to buying things like, oh, I bought a house in Hawaii and I got married and my wife wanted a bigger house in Point Doom and which I understand, like, we had a family and oh, I was traveling 280 days, so it was I needed to buy a plane and blah 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 blah. And I woke up and I had all this stuff that when I kind of had to stop doing what I was doing. The problem for me wasn't that I was scared to lose all of it. I was like, what the fuck do I do with it?
It's a lot of energy.
And it's a lot of money and
Yes.
and when
Yeah.
someone else
But it's weight, all of that is weight.
unloading all of it, I was like,
It's not feeling good, right?
I was like, and I went to, so I bought a little property and I rebuilt it. It was just me and my son at the time. And he's 8 now, and I have a 3-year-old now too. But at the time, Jerome wasn't born. He was like 4. And I bought this house, and I was like, I'm gonna gut it and do a 3-story Bel Air. And my wife and I just moved out of 14,000 square foot house in Brownwood, and I thought, am I doing that? No. So I kept the footprint of the house. It will been at. It's, I don't know, it's under 5,000 square feet. It's a 1-story. I'm like, I want every room to be where we can hear each other. That's what makes me happy. I want my beach house back.
Awesome.
And I made it exactly how I love it. So I, went a little over the top with the, I wanted the red marble and I wanted this, but you don't want, it's not a big house. It's not a flashy house. I went down to, I like cars, but I like the cars that I like to collect for fun, right?
Right.
And getting rid of all that stuff and going down to I'm the happiest I've ever been. So when I say I figured it out at 40, what I figured out is what matters to me is my kids. First of all, all I care about is I need to be home for dinner with my kids. You can't, there's nothing you can offer me.
Vin Diesel has a great quote. He said, when we were having our baby, he told Maria, he said, listen, nothing's real. Nothing in the world anymore is real. News isn't real. Instagram, we were talking earlier, right? No one's life is real. He's like, the only thing that's real are your kids. He's like, you got to have kids. He's like, because it's the only thing that's real. And I thought that was powerful.